Imagine seamless and scalable access to mission-critical business data. Welcome and thank you for joining our quarterly update on SAP Datasphere latest developments and to learn about all the amazing things you can do with SAP Datasphere. With me, I have KP Sauer. Those of you who already know KP, feel free to post an emoji in the chat. Our quarterly update on SAP. And everyone else, please. KP is from the product management team of SAP Datasphere. Before handing over to KP, let me share two housekeeping rules. One, please post all your questions in the chat. Our experts will answer them all during the session. Two, should any questions come up after the session is over, please post them in the comments area below this video. Our experts will have a look at them in the next few days. And now, without further ado, over to you, KP.
Thank you, Tanya, for the introduction. And also hello and welcome from the product management team here to our quarterly What's New session in Datasphere. As Tanya mentioned, my name is KP Sauer, and together with my colleagues, we will talk about the features and enhancements which we delivered in Q2 this year. So be aware, the main content is already pre-recorded, so we can really focus here to answer the questions in the chat directly and live. So for that, I also want to welcome my colleagues here. If you could please come on camera. I see most of you already turned on your cameras. So you see there are more people than just me here help answering the questions in the chat. We have Florian Neukirch, we have Amok Kulkarni, we have Daniel Ingenhaag, we have Sandy Tran, Getjan Solnay, and Swapan Saha, all part of the product management team for SAP Datasphere. So let me share my screen to get started here. Okay. So what we prepared for you today, if we look at the agenda here, is of course some general product updates like always, and then we have a bunch of updates, new features, enhancements in the data integration area, of course updates in data modeling, and then we have updates in various other topics like the CLI, business content, and more. And at the end, I will give you an outlook on what's planned for the next quarters. So with that, let's start the recording and then enjoy the session. The first updates we want to share here in the general product update section is a new data center which we introduced in Switzerland, CH20. This is a data center based on Microsoft Azure with EU access and was introduced earlier in the quarter. The second one is the visual tenant type identifier, which is a banner which can appear on top if you configure it to make it easier to understand for you or your developers in which system you're working. If you have multiple systems like a development, test, sandbox, and production systems, sometimes it's a little difficult to see which system you're currently on, and you always have to check usually the URL to make sure. This now helps you to easier identify this. And if you look at the system, I already configured my system here with a test KP banner on top. What you can do in this configuration area and the system information tab, which was newly added, you can edit this kind of setting, either a custom setting as I did it, or use the predefined ones, put a text, pick a color, then confirm it. I already did that, and here on top there's also a toggle where you can also switch this information off and then the banner is removed again. I can always switch it back on. So very helpful little feature which we added. With that, let me hand it over to Daniel Krämer, Daniel Ingenhaag, Mostafa Shaarawy, and Hannes Keil for more topics around the data integration area.
From a data integration perspective, the first major feature that we can offer now is a better integration with Confluence Kafka offerings. First one is that we are introducing a new connection type, which you can see here. It's simply called Confluent, which is tailored especially to this specific Kafka offering. It's possible to connect either to Confluent Cloud or the corresponding on-premise Kafka offering of Confluent, which is called Confluent Platform. In comparison to the already available Kafka connection type, the difference here is that for Confluent, we also support a schema registry in the Kafka context. But the authentication mechanisms are the same compared to the generic Kafka connection type. Confluent itself, so this connection type can currently only be used as a target for replication flows. And of course, we also have TLS configuration available. So that's it for the connection type itself. Maybe let's go to the next slide, which shows some details regarding schema registry support in the context of replication flows when we use this Confluent connection as a target. If we are creating a replication flow, we now have the possibility to choose Confluent as a target. And the replication flow is extended with a couple of additional configuration options which belong to the schema registry of Confluent. We will see this in the system in a second, so I will not go into the details here right now. One important aspect is, of course, we also have Delta-enabled replication flows with Confluent as a target, and the Delta information is included in the Kafka message body. I will also show you this in a second. So let me maybe switch to the system directly. So now you should see the create connection wizard in a Datasphere tenant. And what is new is this Confluent tile, which lets you create a connection. And here you can see the different properties. One that is maybe important and maybe different to other connection types is that you have a system type that you can choose from, either Confluent Platform, which is the on-premise version, or Confluent Cloud. For the platform, of course, you can choose to use the cloud connector, and everything else is more or less the same. For Confluent Cloud, of course, you cannot use the cloud connector. You can choose between certain SOSL authentication types, either username and password, or for example, using Kerberos. Then for security, you can use TLS. For Confluent Cloud, you can only use a TLS. For Confluent Platform, it's also possible to use MTLS. And then there is an additional section here with the title Schema Registry. Here you can provide the URL to the schema registry. That's always different compared to the Kafka brokers or the list of Kafka brokers that I'm listing at the top. The authentication type is currently only username and password, since we do not support OAuth authentication for Confluent at the moment. And then you can fill in the username and password and simply create a connection. So I will not do this, but rather switch to an example. So what I've done here, I've simply created a very simple table with 4 columns, one ID column, which is a key, and simply filled 3 lines. So it's not an end-to-end scenario, but it's simply a small example which shall showcase how this is going to look like on the Confluent side after we have replicated this with an initial load. So 3 lines, 1 ID, simply counting 1, 2, 3, and the corresponding replication flow that I've created looks like this. So this demo table is the source. I've chosen a prepared Confluent demo connection with a cluster behind it as a target. And if we click on this replication task for this specific table, we can see here a couple of Confluent target settings. Some of them are similar to the settings that are already available for the Kafka connection. For example, the number of partitions, the replication factor. You can also choose between the two different serialization formats, Afro or JSON. In case of Afro, of course, you can also choose a compression type. If you choose Afro for the Confluent connectivity, you need to enable the schema registry. This can be done via this toggle. So either you can choose to use it or not. If you have it on, have the toggle on true, then there are a couple of additional properties that you can set. The first one, so all those properties somehow belong to the schema registry itself, and those configurations are needed to determine how the schema definition is looking like and stored in the schema registry on Confluent side. So first of all, you can specify the record name. Then you can specify the subject name strategy, which somehow determines how the schema is named in the schema registry. Of course, you get then a preview how the schema name is looking like. I've chosen here, for example, topic record, but I can also choose between topic record and topic record. And this simply means that I will choose the name will consist out of the topic and then the record name. The topic name is always assuming now that a new topic is going to be created. This will correspond to the name of the target object, which is demo table. Of course, I can rename it if I want. And the record name is then the second part of the subject name. And therefore, in the preview, we see this demo table - demo record value as the name of the schema definition. We can also specify the compatibility type, which is either default, which corresponds to the default compatibility type that is set for the whole cluster. And then we can choose between the well-known backward, forward, and full compatibility types. And that's it from a configuration perspective. Then of course we can save it, we can deploy the replication flow, then we can start a replication flow, and then it will simply replicate 3 lines. So let's maybe switch to the Confluent cluster. It will create a corresponding schema entry in the schema registry, which you can see in this browser window, together, of course, with the schema ID that's created automatically. And here you can see the schema definition now in a JSON format. What I want to highlight here is you can see the 4 fields of the table itself, but what is added in addition are the 3 CDC columns, the operation type, which gives some information about, was it a delta? What was the delta? Was it only an update or was it a delete? So it's simply the operation type, and then also a timestamp, which you can see at the bottom. And also a third column, which is used in certain special cases, which is called the sequence number, which if certain sources are selected, controls in which sequence certain delta operations arrived, so to say, in the system. Then maybe let's go to the topic itself, is simply demo table. And here you can see 3 entries, which correspond to the 3 rows in the table. We have always a key, we have a value, and if we drill into the value, you can see here that we have a message, which has the 4 properties of the table itself, so the 4 columns, and then the 3 CDC columns. And we have here, for example, for the operation type, the type L, which is simply the initial load. And depending on whether I do an update or a delete on the source side, this operation type, of course, will change. This is how it looks like. Maybe one remark in general. In Kafka, a topic can consist out of several partitions. And if I replicate a certain row of a certain table into a Kafka topic, and I want to do, or I expect delta changes to come in, it's always important that the sequence of the different delta operations is somehow respected also on the target side, which is the Kafka topic itself. And we are ensuring this with the with the message Kafka message key. So every delta change, for example, that would occur on the source side for this entry or for this row in the source table would be put in the same partition where the initial load message was put in. So this is ensured always, just as a remark.
Couple of user stories and requirements I want to talk about today, also in the context of replication flow. The first one is about the scheduling that now was finally delivered. I think there was a lot of demand from a lot of customers. So with this enhancement, what we have provided is basically the ability to allow you to have a scheduled execution of replication flows for performing regular full loads. Because I mean, there are also certain objects, be it now CDS views or others, where either on the one hand side, Delta is maybe even technically not supported, or the data set is, for example, so small that leveraging Delta capabilities is maybe too expensive and not really needed because the data is not frequently changing. And it would be also okay to, for example, have a regular full load in a certain frequency. And that is something that we now delivered. So you can schedule replication flows that are fulfilling the prerequisite of having the load type initial only. So if you have a replication flow with other load types like initial and delta, this would not work, as the scheduling is really happening on a replication flow level and not on a single, let's say, replication object or dataset level. We are planning to enhance that in the future as well, but this is kind of the current state of a first delivery that for, let's say, small data sets or data sets not fulfilling the criteria for delta load, that you can also perform a scheduled execution of a replication flow. And this is basically following the same dialogue that you already know as of today in Datasphere. So we're basically reusing this dialogue here, and it was also kind of the prerequisite. What was now done in the same shipment is that you can also add the replication flows in task chains, which are exactly also fulfilling this prerequisite that I just talked about. So we basically have, on the one hand, the support of scheduling of replication flows, and you can also add them respectively in task chains. So I have here an example with, let's say, 2 CDS views from an S/4HANA system having initial only as load type, and you can see here in the, let's say, replication flow property panel, I have now the ability to define the schedule. And this is exactly the case where I can now define either a simple schedule, or I can also use the cron expression, depending on how I would like to define it. And that is exactly kind of the same dialogue that you already know for, let's say, other services in Datasphere, like, for example, the data flow and so on. And here's basically the case where I can create a schedule. And imagine now if you would have, I have now these 2 data sets with initial only. If I would now change one to initial and delta, that would basically won't work. So that is really important that at least for the current feature that we delivered, that all of the data sets need to have initial load only. That means if you want to have a regular execution of a replication flow, please make sure that you group the different data sets accordingly so that you can create a schedule. And the same here. I have now, for example, this one replication flow. And in the end, if I would model a task chain, I would be now also able to basically see the replication flows that are in. And I would then also be able, in order to use them in the task chains for example, having some end-to-end orchestration of different tasks where the replication flow is also one part of it. And I already mentioned before, we are trying to basically to enhance that in the future. Also in conjunction with the delta load and also the, let's say, sequential execution then, for example, on the delta level between a rep flow and a transformation flow. And if you now look on some additional features, they have now not explicitly come with the wave of Datasphere, but there were just 2 important features that we want to highlight, which are, let's say, important also for replication flow, where especially in the context, if you want to integrate data from ODP data sources, and they have mainly been delivered via, let's say, SAP ABAP-based deliverables, in this case, SAP nodes. So there was no dedicated, let's say, user story from the Datasphere side, as the change that was introduced to support that feature was really only coming via, let's say, the SAP release cycles, and in this case, via an SAP node. And we thought it's still of importance to bring it up, even though they are already out for a couple of weeks, to at least also share the knowledge, because some of you may not have observed that. And one feature is the parallelized replication of ODP data sources. That means during the initial load in the past, we had unfortunately only kind of a single thread process, resulting in kind of a poor performance, for example, comparing to remote tables. And what we have now done is we have basically enhanced this. And we are basically now, if you implement the node, and there are also, let's say, some subnodes related to that one. So it's, as always, the colleagues who are working on it on a daily basis recommended to install all of the known SAP nodes with our node analyzer to make sure all of the fixes and features are included. And if your system is basically up to date, what you can do is there are two different parameters which are currently residing in the SAP backend, but we are also looking there into the future of providing some of them even in the Datasphere UI. But this is kind of the current state. And here you can basically have two configurations to, let's say, increase the performance of ODP data sources and replication flows. One is the degree of partitions. By default, there are 3 for the initial load, but you can let's say, easily increase that to a higher number. And you can also maintain the package size, which, for example, could be also done in ODP natively, and was, for example, also used even for remote tables if you want to do, for example, certain performance tuning. But these are kind of the 2 new default values that you can change in order to influence the performance. And to give you really just a very rough number, but don't, let's say, take it for granted in each and every scenario. When we tried around, so this change here with the new default values will probably make the performance 3 times faster. In some internal tests, we were also able to, for example, with some tweaks, to get 5 times faster as before, just at least to get a rough idea. But of course, it depends a bit on the different scenarios, system landscape, and so on. Another topic that I wanted to highlight, which was I think also coming up quite some time, and actually both the features, so this one here and the one before, was delivered with the same SAP node, and this was basically the feature previously when we talked about integration from ODP data sources with a replication flow, and you wanted to use the Delta replication. Some of you who may have come across this in the customer conversations, there was the requirement to have this real-time flag. So that is kind of a property of the ODP data source that can be set, which is usually done for newer sources, but for the old ODP data sources like the SAP ones, usually there is no real-time support in the ODP context and framework available. And this is what we now have improved. That means now with this enhancement, you can not only perform Delta replication with ODP sources that have this real-time flag enabled, but you can also perform Delta replication, which are generally Delta enabled, but don't have the real-time feature in the ODP framework available. So that is also now possible, so that you can basically realize kind of a batch-driven Delta load integration, if you want to call it like this. Maybe not the best terminology, but at least to describe it. And by default, I have described here a bit how that looks like, because in the end, we are trying to use the default value that is set by the ODP framework. This is also typically the case how, for example, remote tables are doing it. And if this data is not maintained, meaning if there is no default value, we use the default value of 1 hour, which is also the default if you would use the ODP interface via STI and remote tables. And there's a special rule where we see in case there is a default value below our default, we basically override it to 1 hour, because in the end, we also want to make sure that we do not really, let's say, overload the system with too many requests, meaning let's imagine by mistake you are basically configuring kind of real-time data access, always asking for data, but in the source you only have this hourly or even maybe daily delta. This lot of requests are not really necessary, and therefore we try to basically cover the case in the first step with this logic. But we are also now looking already into the ability in order to control it from the UI. And there we are also looking into reusing our existing parameter of this, let's say, delta retry interval that we anyhow have in place. So there are already discussions happening with development that we kind of reuse that setting here to have one streamlined and harmonized parameter to control it.
With that feature, we are now allowing the integration of SQL procedures into task chains. That means that if we have a procedure that is defined in the open schema, we are now able to use it as a part in our task chain. I'm going to show you that right now in a demo. First of all, we'd like to verify that in our open schema, we have already a procedure created, and we can confirm that because I have a couple of them created in my open schema. And now I'm going to jump to the data builder, where I'm going to navigate to the chain editor, where I'm going to create a new chain. And we're going to notice here that we have a new tab. And under it, currently, we only have one option, which is the procedure option. However, in the near future, more options will follow here. And I'm now going to show you what happens if we try to click here. If we have not yet granted to the space the privilege to execute on the database open schema, then nothing will appear. So we can do that by following the documentation. It's quite simple. We have to navigate to that link and to copy that procedure to our editor and to fill it with our data. I have already prepared one and adapted to fit to my schema name and space ID. I'm going to run that little procedure here, and I will now refresh the task chain editor. And now if I repeat again what I did, then all my procedures in the open schema will show up on the left panel and are now ready to be used in the task chain. Now I can immediately drag and drop them into the chain editor. If the procedure requires input parameters, a pop-up will show on the UI where we have to fill the input parameters. We can as well confirm that by having a look on my procedure. It requires two parameters, which is what we have to fill now, the table name and the number of records. That procedure will create a new table and will fill it according to the number of records that we are going to give here. So we can call our table demo table, and we want to fill it with 100 records. Press OK. Now we get a new overview as well here about the input parameters. Clicking here, we are able to know the values that we have provided, and we can as well edit them at any time in the future. I can just right now go directly ahead and deploy that chain procedures. And now that I have it deployed, I can go on and run it. And in the meantime, while running, I'm going to show you now that as I have already granted the needed privilege to be able to execute a procedure in the open schema. Now, every time I go in the chain editor, I will always find them available. And of course, any new procedure that will be created there will automatically be available to be used in the chain without any further need to do any additional privilege granting. So Now we could go to the data integration monitor and check whether our chain has already finished. And now we get the notification that the procedure already completed. And to confirm that, we could check on our tables if we now got the new table created. Here we have the demo table. It has been created, and if we look at the demo table, we can confirm that now it has 100 items filled in like what we have configured with our input parameters. You might already know we have shipped a while ago the feature to send email notifications upon the completion of a task chain. However, that was intended to cover only failures that actually happened during the chain run. And now, as a follow-up to that feature, we are delivering an improvement which allows you to get an email notification even if the chain run never began. Typically, if a failure happened during the preparation of triggering a chain run, that would mean that now email notifications would arrive for issues related to consent, outages, admission control rejections, or even a parallel run that would make the whole chain fail for being locked. So actually the main motive behind that feature is to provide a better email notification coverage even for failures that happen in a very early phase of the run, aiming to provide a quick update for any kind of failure that happens on a task chain and therefore giving the opportunity to react quickly. That would be all.
This very simple user story just changes the behavior, how the views are displayed in the data integration monitor. Previously, in order to see views in the data integration monitor, you had to manually add them or had them run at least once. Now we have changed that behavior so that we have these three little tabs or pre-filters, and you can either show all views which are scheduled, or all views which have been at least persisted once, so that you can see a log in here. These quick filters help you to set. The default opening will be the scheduled, as it is deemed that this is going to be the most used one for daily operations and daily drivers, where you want to see, basically, you come in the morning and want to see which ones failed overnight or have been failed based on your scheduling. So how does that look in the system? Yeah, just go to the data integration monitor into your space and select the views, and you will immediately see this, and you can switch around between these different types of settings. If I see all, I see the ones, basically the ones which are currently scheduled, the other ones were not scheduled. They're sorted by the ones which have ran, so that you can easily look at the logs here. And if you click on schedules, you see just the ones which have a regular schedule, and persisted ones, you see all the other ones which have persisted in order to look at the logs.
With this user story, the transformation flow now supports views as sources for the transformation flow. So the only thing that has changed basically is that instead of only tables, you have now the capability to use views. And this allows us some interesting features, and primarily the one that we can now push logic into a view and reuse it in multiple different transformation flows. So it gives us a little bit of a reuse capability as well as stacking. So we had to redesign views and transformation flow previously completely new, but now you can basically stack views on top of each other and still use it as part of a transformation flow. The only thing that we have to note is that when we're pulling in a view, that is a SQL view, and a SQL view does not understand logical deletes or partial data sets. So that one will always be in the full mode. That means that will always be delivering both or all data active data, and you will not have the option to switch between active and delta when it comes from a view. Obviously, if you join it with others, you can still do that as you need, and then pull the delta from other sides. But it gives you a reuse and a stacking capabilities of views. How does that look like? I have created here a view that in this case joins me the English text to my product master data, and now I want to join in the English description of the product category for this product, so I can create a new transformation flow. And I will simply choose a graphical view to make it easy to follow. And now I could start using my view as a source in my transformation flow, which wasn't possible earlier. And if I want, now I can pull in my product category text table and filter it, for example, to a language. And maybe also not take all of the fields here. So let me move some fields out that I do not want to have. And I'm going to rename this here, change name to product category text. And then I'm going to join in this together. And again, it finds automatically the link. And now I have the product category text here in English. You can still remove these other duplicate product category ID, which I do not need, because it's already in the attributes of product. And with that, I have created a transformation flow, which includes a view and, in this case, a table. And you see it states view underneath. Here it says delta capture table underneath. I do have the abilities to switch between delta capture and all active records on the table. I do not, as this is an SQL view and it has to completely be executed. I do not have the option to do so here. There is no switch between those two run nodes. And therefore, this will always execute it in full. Just to remember that, otherwise it would have to become part of this full stack, and you would have to decide which is the leading delta table across all of those tables included here. This is the alternative option if you want delta processing for more complex type. Stacking inside of transformation flow with in transformation flow customized or designed view transformations is planned but not available yet.
Thank you, colleagues, and let's move on to the modeling topics with Brendon and Mona.
Hello, this is the demo for the new non-cumulative measures in the analytic model. Here we're starting with the result showing a non-cumulative measure. So we have our preview of the analytic model, and we have a couple of different dimensions selected: warehouse, product, and transaction dates, ordered by transaction dates. And then for those warehouses and products, we have quantities coming in and out of the warehouse. And then we can see our our non-cumulative measure where the quantity is totaled as we go. So we have a starting value of 1,000, and then 200 come into the warehouse, it goes up, another 100 come into the warehouse, and so on. So this this will keep track of our stock. This is a very widely used concept in BW and now is supported in the analytic model. So to show you how to configure this, let's go back. This is the same model, but just without that measure yet configured. You must have a fact table with an association to a time table. If I look at my fact table, you need to have a couple of things in your actual data. You must have a record type. So we'll see there's a record type column, and that must be an integer value. And we'll see in a second, there's a 1 there for the first initial value, and then zeros for the rest of them that are going to be the incremental updates when we create our non-cumulative measure. So we see this here. We also see there are other dimension columns that were used in the analytic model and our quantities and values here. So let's create our new non-cumulative measure. We just go to measures, create non-cumulative measure. It gives us a default name, which is fine. We can select the source of the measure, so we'll use the quantity. And then we have these fields. So these common properties will actually affect all of the non-cumulative measures that I configure. So if I create these and then create another non-cumulative measure within my same model, they will share these fields. So here I have the record type showing that initial value. I'm going to use the transaction date. And then for the time, I can either leave them both empty or fill them both in. I'll choose to fill them both in for this demo. So I'll have my start and end dates. I can choose the exception aggregation. So this is for my sums at the end of the month. Do I want to show just the last value? Do I want to show the sum or average or one of these other values? And then right now we have our first value has a starting value. If we have time before our starting value or before we have a change, we have the option of either showing nulls or zeros in those unknown values before the non-cumulative gets started. So now that I've configured this, just to show that it actually works, we can go back to the preview and we'll have to select our dimensions again in the preview, but that should match exactly where we started the demo.
Hi, I would like to show you the end-to-end scenario of the multilingual metadata support. First, we would start with the translation dashboard. For example, the translation dashboard will act as a central repository for all the translations. To enable the translation board, first we need to go to the space and we need to set the source language. Here in the translation, we need to select the source language for that corresponding space. And this cannot be undone once we have done it. And this enables the corresponding space for the translation dashboard. Once I have set it over here, I should be able to see my space in my translation dashboard. In the initial opening, we will not have any entities over here, any kind of analytical model or its dependent entities. We have to add based on our requirement, and then the entities gets added over here. We can maintain the translation in two ways. Either way, one way is to select the entity and we can go to the UI and we can feed in our text manually. We can select our target language and we have to feed in our corresponding translated text for all the fields, and depends on the number of fields or the number of percentage of fields it gets added the text, the status gets displayed accordingly. I will explain that. For example, if we have like 33 fields over here and I have the translated text only for the 10 fields, then it will display the status as partially translated. So for example, here I have the translated text in Deutsch for all the fields. So this should give me a status as fully translated. So here, if we click on the status, it should give me that I have Deutsch or German maintained and the status is available. If we have only a partially translation available, it should inform us that we have only the partially translated text available. The other way is if we have too many fields and it gets very hard to maintain it manually, and if we have XLIF files from any other source systems, we can also upload them directly. We need to select the analytical model or hierarchy or the view, its dependent objects, and then we have to click on the upload files in the upload wizard, and I can select as many languages as I would like to have, and based on the source settings in the file name, the corresponding translated language gets added to the entity. I can add only the analytical models here and its corresponding dependent entities like remote table or hierarchy or any other view that gets added by default. Even if you have hierarchy, that also gets added by default. Once I have maintained my text in the analytical model or in the view, I have to go to my corresponding view and I need to deploy the same. For example, I have made a minor change in my model. let's go and check the minor. Let's do a minor change. For example, here I'm having some minor changes, and click on save. And once it gets updated, I have to go back to my analytical model and I have to redeploy it, because whenever I make any changes into my metadata translation, I need to deploy the corresponding objects for the backend system. After the deployment, I can able to visualize my text. So for example, here I have the changes to deploy and I need to deploy my analytical model. Once the deployment is completed, I should be able to visualize the same in my analytical model preview. So it's still deploying. We have the still deploying status. Let's wait for the deployment completion. And also we need to make a note that I need to have my corresponding data access language set according to the expected translation or expected localization. So here I have maintained Deutsch, and also I have maintained my Deutsch text for the entity as well. So I should be able to visualize them in my preview. And we can also visualize the translated text or the metadata in the localized language on the SAC story as well. So it's deployed. Let's look into the preview. So for example, here I have my dimensions in German. And if I go and look into my model, I should have to have here the English texts displayed. Since I have maintained my translated in the German language, in the preview, I'm able to visualize it. So for example, if I click on this required date and add it, I should able to visualize my hierarchy also in the German language. So I used to have year, quarter, month, day hierarchies, and here due to the translation maintained for German, I'm having the corresponding hierarchy names as well in the localized format. I can also visualize the same over here in the story. I have a pre-built story already available, and if we go and look on to add dimensions, I'm getting all my dimensions in the German language. The same way it applies for the measures. It depends on how many languages that I maintain, and also for how many fields. So if I have a corresponding text maintained for that measure or the dimension or the attribute, it should get listed over here. If we don't have it, and if it is only partially translated, it goes back or it falls back to the source language, which is in our case it is English.
Thank you, Mona. So let's get to the next topic, which is the column level lineage and impact analysis in the modeling area. And so this gets us one level deeper on the impact and lineage capability here to also provide that on the column level, not only on an object level, so that you can really track down the columns, where they are coming from, what they are impacting in this column and in this lineage and impact analysis. So let's directly jump into the system to show you that, how that works. So if you're in the data builder here in one of your spaces and select an object and the impact and lineage analysis button, you get to your screen you're probably used to already. You see one additional icon here on those objects, which is this tabular icon, which shows here 25 columns for this one, and then you get this additional pop-up where you can either select a certain column by just typing it, narrowing down the search, or you can also simply select one from the list. I selected 2 now, and now you get the additional view on these 2 columns. You can also open up like the forward-looking side, so the impact side, rearrange it and see where it's being used, where it's coming from. If you want to look at it from more complex models here, where we can easily then backtrack the lineage coming from a variety of different sources, and also the other way around. If you look at more comprehensive model here, we can check out the impact a certain column has, and that is working across the different spaces. This next topic is not a direct feature of SAP Datasphere itself. It's a feature of SAP Analytics Cloud, but very relevant to also development in SAP Datasphere, because on the SAC side, now it is enabled to change a live model behind the story while preserving the content and the features you built into that story. So this is working on a live connection, and a live connection also with like an analytic model or an analytical data set from Datasphere behind it, and you can change that in the story now. So we wanted to share this new and very often useful feature, that you can now easier switch, for example, from an analytical data set and replace it with an analytic model, or replace one analytic model with another one, a newer version or a newer type of model you might have created. So very helpful there. And then another smaller topic, but also interesting, is that we now introduced into the space management a long description field. So very simple thing, but you can now in your space management, you can now add a long description, so 4,000 character maximum, which can be added so to give more explanation what this space is about for others who might not be that familiar with your setup. We also have some updates on the business content side for the second quarter of this year. And if we look at the details here, there are some packages which are updated, and there are some new packages. The new ones are colored here in green in the list on the top left, what you see here. So what we basically delivered is we enhanced the finance foundation for SAP S/4HANA and S/4HANA Cloud. In addition, we provide a new package for SuccessFactors operational reporting content now, as well as extending the foundational part for S4 with the transportation management for S/4HANA, and also provide a new package here for Ariba. That's also a more foundational type of topic with a very broad data model, similar to the finance foundation on the finance side. And two other updates which we made is on the SAP Signavio side for the process insights, where we, for example, replaced remote tables with local tables in the process there. And for the statistical process control toolkit, that was enhanced now with analytical models. And with that, over to Florian for an update on the CLI.
Hi again. With F9 we completed the available commands for the command line interface CRUD operations on objects that are coming from the data builder or the business builder. And with that, you are now able to perform the create and update command via the CLI directly in your console or within your custom coding. Let's see how this looks like in action. So when I type in the first command, that shows me all the objects I'm able to work with for my tenant. I can see, and you might already know that from the previous session, that I'm able to work with this kind of objects directly with the CLI. In our case, we want to take a look now at the local tables. And if I now hit enter, the system generates me a list of the available commands for this type of objects. In this case, as promised, I can now perform create, list, read, update, delete, and I have the option to get some help here. In our example, the next thing I want to do is I want to have a list of all the local tables that are available in the space I'm currently working with. So hitting the enter again. This is now the list, quite a good list of local tables that are available there. And let's say I want to especially read one of them. So I adjust the command accordingly. And I want to not see that in the console, but I want the system to write it directly in my table.json document. And now the system asks me for a technical name of the local table. Let's use the webshop sales. Paste that in there. And up we go. And if I now open it, you can see the definition of that very table here. Let's say I want to copy that. All I have to do is to adjust the technical name, because this is kind of my identifier here in that case. So I now named it into webshop sales 2. Jumping back to the CLI, I simply have to change the command a bit from read to create, and I have to define the input file. Simply hit enter. And now what happens in the background is that the system automatically creates the object and deploys it automatically. That's why it's taking a bit more time. I also have the option to say, hey, dear system, please just create the object, but not deploy it. So you can explicitly define if you want to have your objects you are creating to be deployed or not. In our case, as said, the system now saved and deployed it. And when we take another look at the list command, like we did previously, we can see that now the webshop sales 2 local table is available. And with that, back to you.
Thank you for all those details, and let's have a look forward on the outlook on the features, functions we are planning on introducing the next quarters. And so the first ones here in the data integration area, we want to support the use of local tables with delta capture as a source in replication flows, also with additional delta load capabilities. Another important one here based on our ABAP system connectivity for CDS and ODP based sources, that we want to support sources without primary key in replication flows there, and add, as we also communicated earlier, additional sources, new sources for cloud object stores, as well as Microsoft SQL, Confluent Kafka, Google BigQuery, and maybe others here as new or additional sources to replication flows. If we look at the bottom here, another important topic is the integration with the cloud-based transport management system. So Datasphere will be integrated there into the BTP Cloud TMS, as well as we want to enhance the transportation features with enabling you to change a space before the import of a transport, so that you can have a model sitting in space A in your source and could be changed to space B on your target system. Very neat and helpful capability. Then another interesting one on the spaces area. So currently, if you delete a space, this is gone. That's why we have specific security mechanisms in there also to ask you multiple times if you really want to delete a space. We will in Q3 enable what we call logical space deletion. So basically introducing a kind of recycle bin where for accidental deletions you could restore an accidentally deleted space again, and still have all the artifacts available after that restore, so that that prevents another level of security for accidental deletions. On the marketplace side, of course, I think we communicated that last time also the license-specific data selection, also enable that via the CLI capability, and of course we want to introduce the Skim API for more automation capabilities here for with the external authorization tooling. In the modeling side, so we want to support variables in calculated measures on the analytic model, as well as the undo redo functionality, very useful. I personally like those undo redo always a lot. Also, we want to introduce here the concept of compatibility contracts, which some of you might already know from CDS views based on our S4HANA systems, so including the lifecycle management there, that you can define certain views as stable objects then, and then only compatible changes are allowed to those to avoid breaking models or stories on top of it while doing changes on the system. And last but not least here, the scheduling of mass deletions of filtered records from local tables, so enabling you to easier operate with mass deletions on local tables, which you want to introduce. Then in Q3 as well as Q4, we're going to expand the data center coverage with the hyperscalers Google and Microsoft Azure. So you will see new data centers coming up in each of the quarters there. Then on the lineage and impact side, where I just talked earlier about the column level lineage, we will also enhance that lineage and impact analysis with data products in Q4, or that's planned for Q4, as well as the semantic onboarding specifically with HANA Cloud calculation views is planned to be enhanced, as well as, again, on the analytic model side, there's always a lot of new enhancements coming where we plan for the end of the year the stacking of analytic models, also with central measure definition, as well as support for display navigational attributes there. And also in Q4, we will enhance the model validation framework, which we introduced earlier this year with additional checks, specifically around referential integrity, but also association consistency. The catalog will be enhanced with additional sources, what we're planning. And on the task chain side, very interesting, we want to introduce the concept of a global task chain, meaning global running across spaces, and also integrating the process chains there, as well as versioning support, which very likely will be a 2025 feature, as well as these other ones here with the namespaces, what we plan for next year, and multiple availability zones to help you further on the stability and high availability of your tenants. And of course, GenAI capabilities. We are looking for an API first approach. They are supporting other tools like SAP Analytics Cloud, Joule, etc. With these capabilities based on the data and the metadata, which is stored in Datasphere.
KP, I think I cannot hear you. You are still muted somehow. All right.
There we go. Can
yes.
you again? Okay.
Yes. now.
Zoom picked a different mic, which didn't work. So what I want to say is thanks to all speakers for preparing the content, and we will also post a link to the slides you saw here in the YouTube description below. And with that, Tanya, back to you for some final closing words.
Thank you. But first of all, a really warm thank you to all speakers in the video, but also to all of the experts in this chat answering all the questions. And there were so many questions. So big thank you for answering all the questions. As I mentioned at the very beginning, should we not manage to answer all the questions in the chat, or you have further questions coming up, please post them in the comments here underneath this video, and our experts will have a look at them. Last but not least, of course, a big thank you to all attendees for joining. It was awesome to have you all here, and we look forward to seeing you again next time. Have a great day, have a great evening, depending on where you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.